Hello, and welcome to the list of my personal favourite hit songs of 1991. This was the year where the highest grossing film was Terminator 2, the highest rated TV show was Roseanne, and the highest selling album was Metallica's Black Album. I know that in the States, the very early 90s are kind of seen as a false start to the decade, and while that is true to a certain extent, to be honest, I was actually kind of spoilt for choice with both this year and the 1990 best lists. I think part of the reason for that is the obvious, which is that the most interesting stuff was happening outside of the States. One trend in 1991 specifically that I didn't get to touch in on my worst list for this year, which does show up on this best list to a certain extent, was just how optimistic a good chunk of the hit songs were. And that was mostly because we had just come out of the Cold War, and in Europe specifically, we were working towards a single market in 1992. So there was this brief time where it seemed like Europe was now going to be this one big happy continent. Sadly, that didn't last very long now, did it? Now, criteria, as always, is anything that debuted in Billboard's year-end list for 1991, the European Hot 100 year-end list for 1991, or anything that cracked the top 10 anywhere in the world that didn't make either list. Now, let's get on with the show. Sunshine on a rainy day makes my soul make... Here in the UK, this song is one of the most quintessential one-hit wonders of the entire 90s. It's a song that manages to both sound of the time, but also sound just as fresh as when it first came out. This whole song is just summer in a bottle for me, and it never fails to put a smile on my face. By the way, fun fact, this song was co-written by a member of Killing Joke of all bands. You know, the band that did that awesome 80s song, that Killing Joke? Yeah, small world. This is one of those songs that doesn't really require much deep analysis, so I apologise greatly for copping out with the lack of substantial commentary, but hey, some songs just don't need it. This is just a surface level happy song that makes you smile, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. You'd have to be an especially miserable bastard for this to not lighten up your mood even the teensiest little bit. And I say this as someone with chronic depression, so if this doesn't make you happy, then I can't help you, mate. But we're never gonna survive unless... So after providing the vocals on Killer the previous year, it wasn't all that surprising that Seal will end up launching his own solo career the following year, and this was his big solo debut single. And it was a big stylistic departure as well, as this song isn't a big thumping techno jam like Killer was. This is more of a slick and flashy pop song held by none other than Trevor Horn, who, if you don't know who he is, he was famously the guy behind the Buggles, as well as producing big smash hits for the likes of Grace Jones and Frankie Goes to Hollywood in the 80s. And it's mostly because of his production on this song that makes me like this song so much. There's very distinct musical parts throughout the song, which somehow mash together really well, from the bleepy intro to the ambient stuff that makes up most of the song. Then the middle eight has this sudden drum break, and there's this acoustic guitar part towards the end of the song. It's almost minimalist, but simultaneously very ambitious. The song itself is about how it's necessary to be a little bit insane in order to cope with what the world throws at you in life. And I think there is some truth to that. The world can be a very crazy place, and trying to stay sane throughout it all will just end badly for you. Overall, I just find it a very compelling song, and it's nice to see a song with this much ambition do so well. Now, for us Anglophones who are not familiar with Francophone music, I cannot understate just how much of a big deal Mylène Farmer is in the French music industry. She's basically the French Madonna in more ways than one, in that she has an endless stream of bops, She has a huge gay following, and she also has her fair share of controversial music videos. This isn't one of them, but this is arguably her most famous song. I don't know, can any French speakers please correct me if I'm wrong here? Now, in my intro for this video, I talked about how there was a lot of optimism in the hits of 1991, but for those of you who can understand French, this song is basically the complete opposite, as this song talks about how the world is in complete disarray and you're part of a generation that is disenchanted with everything. Something that is shockingly very relevant for me as a millennial in 2022. Oh boy! There's something darkly amusing about a deeply cynical and almost apocalyptic song being this upbeat and danceable. I like it when pop songs are a bit twisted like that. So in a way, you could say that This Is for the 90s what 1999 was for the 80s.
There's no other way, there's no other way.
Okay, I'm gonna get a bit self-indulgent with this entry because anyone who knows me will have fully expected this to be somewhere on this list, as I've made it no secret that I'm a pretty big Blur fan, and this is their first big hit. It does very much sound of the time, as their record label pretty much forced them to adopt a more Madchester sound just as that whole scene was on the brink of imploding. What with the Stone Roses getting an injunction from their old record label, which put them on hold for a few years and thus stalling their momentum. And of course the infamous Happy Mondays album Yes Please, which also had the distinction of putting Factory Records out of business. Nice one. But regardless of the song being somewhat trend-chasing, it's still a very good song in my opinion in its own right. It's got a really good hook, and Graham Coxon's distinctive guitar style is very much on show here. That first album is arguably their weakest one, but even back then you could see some of the potential the band had in terms of being a future force in pop music. So yeah, expect to see more of their songs in my best list for the next few years. Slight spoiler alert.
I don't know what is love.
What? I hear you say to yourselves, what on earth is this song? Well, it was a hit in New Zealand, which does count in my criteria. And if you're thinking that's too small of a market to put on this list, well, I was actually born there, so it matters to me, so nah. Anyway, this song has pretty much become a massive Kiwi classic. It's become an unofficial anthem for us All Blacks fans, as it's played at a lot of games. And it's easy to see why. It's a great sing-along song when you're drunk and feeling the euphoria of scoring the umpteenth try against the opposition, which, considering this is the All Blacks we're talking about, that's pretty much a common occurrence. Which is kind of odd, because if you pay close enough attention to the lyrics, it's actually kind of a sad breakup song. It's just that the music is so upbeat that you don't really care regardless. It's kind of got that nice jangle pop quality to it as well, which of course is hitting just the right buttons for me to get to like it, independent of my sporting affiliations. Look, it just reminds me of home, okay? And it gives me those warm, fuzzy feelings. What more do you want me to say? Yeah, you all probably expected this to be somewhere on this list, as I said before that I am a fan of this band's songs. And here in the UK at least, this was the biggest hit, as it made it all the way to number 1. According to Wikipedia, this band were the biggest selling singles act of the entire year of 1991. That's pretty damn impressive, if I may say so myself. If What Time Is Love gave us a teaser for the kind of massive in-your-face rave jam that they will bring us in the early 90s, then this song basically carved that manifesto into stone. One of the main criticisms of the whole rave movement of the late 80s and early 90s was that the acts were basically faceless and anonymous. But the KLF didn't just bring an image to the table, they brought a whole goddamn mythology. Granted, no one seemed to understand what it all meant other than just random chants of moo moo, but it still looked really cool. It's also worth pointing out that this song had an infamous grindcore version in a collaboration with Extreme Noise Terror at the next year's Brits, but I think that's a story for another day. So, as I mentioned in the worst list for this year, this was a song that finally ended that way too long #1 run that awful Bryan Adams song had in our charts. And there couldn't have been a better song to do that, in my opinion. This was, as we all know, the big lead single for U2's massive Reinvention album, and it certainly did make a statement. This wasn't your granny's U2 anymore. No more achingly earnest Americana ballads, they were now going for ironic futurism to kick off the 90s. That album, Achtung Baby, threw people for a loop when it first dropped. And I would actually argue this is probably my favourite U2 era of them all. Not that that's an unpopular opinion or anything. It's still recognisably them, but there's some really cool dance experimentations in there to keep things fresh. I've seen people say that this song in particular is an INXS ripoff, which would kind of make sense as the two bands were BFFs in real life, and I do kind of hear the influence in Bongo's delivery to an extent, but it's not super obvious to me at least. I know for me at least I can detect a fairly big Madchester influence on this song, as it has a kind of groove and kind of a similar breakbeat that you'd find in a lot of those songs, and combining that with the more spiky guitars creates this interesting combination to me. As a lead single to this specific album, it really does do the job in combining various contemporary sounds to somehow make it sound futuristic and forward-thinking, which is what they were aiming for with this whole album. I have no idea how the band managed to do it, but it certainly does get a big thumbs up from me. So, I've mentioned a few times in this video already that the very early 90s was a very optimistic time because the Cold War had just ended, and it seemed like it was going to be a very peaceful time. Well, sadly that whole sentiment didn't last very long, as I've said before, but this song to me is probably the most emblematic of that whole sentiment to me. I mean, it does make a lot of sense considering that this song is specifically about the revolutions of 1989. Obviously, I was only a year old when the Iron Curtain fell, so I can only imagine how monumental that whole year was to everyone who could remember it at the time. The chorus has the line, "watching the world wake up from history," which feels very apt as the status quo of the then was suddenly overhauled to a new future of possibilities. And looking at it through a 2022 lens, it does kind of make me sad that we're somewhat regressing as a society, and I desperately wish there was something in our future to be optimistic about compared to then. Also, I was really surprised to see that this Madchester style song was a big hit in the United States. I mean, I had assumed that that scene didn't come close to making any sort of impact over there. But then again, this was the period where anything could be a hit on Billboard, so good job America, I guess. So, it's probably a bit overdue that I put a hip-hop song on one of my best lists. Well, you could argue that this is more R&B, but that's beside the point. I don't hate rap music at all. I do like the odd song. It's just not really my thing, and I'm nowhere near qualified to comment on the genre as I only have the most basic knowledge, so I tend to not put many rap songs on either list for that very reason. But with that being said, even a dumbass like me knows that this song is just absolutely amazing. This heavily samples the song True by Spandau Ballet, which is a song that gets a bit overhated here in the UK, But in my opinion, it's utilised really well in this song to create this very blissful and dreamy atmosphere. See what I did there? I can't really think of many other songs where the title accurately describes the feeling of the song that it's trying to invoke. And it does do a great job of capturing that feeling of wistful reminiscing. Consequently, there really isn't much else to analyse about this. I mean, its greatness really speaks for itself. This is one of those songs where I could just close my eyes and I'm taken to a whole other world. Yeah, it's not really a song that you can think too hard about. I mean, just sit back and enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that, as I've already said in this list with another entry. So this is the point of the video where I do this cop-out credit scroll for all the honourable mentions. I'm really sorry to have to do it this way, but I really could not trim it down to a reasonable size without making any painful cuts, and I didn't want to spend half the video talking about just the honourable mentions, so I just felt it would be quicker just to do it this way. Really sorry, I hope you understand. If you don't recognise any of the song titles, just go and look them up on YouTube once this video is over. And that should be done by now. So what's left is to do a quick recap of the top 10 before we get into our number one pick.
That's me in the corner. That's me in the...
So this is kind of similar to my number one pick on my best of 1990 video. I won't spoil it for you guys if you haven't watched it yet, but this song also happens to be the most famous song by an act that I generally like, which also happens to be too easy of a choice for me specifically. But nuts to that, these are my honest picks and I shouldn't have to compromise or apologise for making them. On paper, this is not the obvious song you would think would become a band's biggest hit. I mean, it's 5 minutes long and there's no obvious chorus, but even still it manages to be compelling and memorable despite that. Everything in the instrumental just sounds so lush with the string section and the mandolin that I'm just in complete awe of this song. And I think I've said before that I've got an almost unnatural fondness for sad boy songs about unrequited love, because I've been there many times and this is the widely accepted meaning of the song. Of course, everyone knows that losing my religion is a colloquial phrase used in the southern USA that means losing your mind, which kind of puts a different and interesting spin on a very well-trodden subject matter. This song really couldn't have come at a better time for the band, considering that at the end of the year we saw the musical landscape be completely shaken up. While REM already had a couple of Hot 100 hits by this point, this pretty much marked their true mainstream breakthrough, and just in time for the college rock that they were previously the figureheads of to become the dominant subgenre of rock music in the decade. So, it only feels right for me to put this song as my number one hit of 1991. So that's it for this video. So next up is going to be my worst of 1992 video. I know December people are going to be putting out 2022 year-end videos, but I just want to try and sneak in both my 92 year-end videos first, and then I'm going to do my 2022 videos in the new year. So yep, that's basically my schedule for the next 2 months. So until next time, I'll see you around.